the Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 2nd chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some of it out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord. Any of you who have spent any time reading the Gospel of John, you know that everything that John recounts has this curious and elusive quality to it that the other Gospels just don't seem to have. The other Gospels are much more straightforward. But in John, every gesture, every detail, and every word suggests more than what appears on the surface. And John's story at the wedding of Cana is no different. It's imbued with layers of meaning, symbolism, and ritual. So for example, it is the 3rd day that the wedding takes place, and it is most likely the 3rd day of that wedding when Jesus changes the water into wine, because back then, weddings could last upwards of 6 or 7 days. And they had been partying long enough at this point that all the wine had run out. So for John, this, of course, foreshadows the 3rd day when Jesus will rise from the dead. And then also, in today's story, there are 6 stone jars. As we all know, God created the universe in 6 days. So John makes sure that we know from these 6 jars of nothingness, everything will rush forth. And then, of course, who could miss the baptismal and the Eucharistic symbolism? We have water and we have wine. And finally, there are those cryptic words that Jesus speaks to Mary, his mother. He says, "My hour has not yet come." We all know that in this party hour, in this party moment, Jesus does indeed fill the the jars to overflow with wine. And so this is an hour of gladness. But the hour for which he has come will not be one of gladness. His mother, and of course it's this way for John, his mother is present for his first sign of divinity, and his mother will be present for his last breath of humanity. All these fantastical elements in John, they make it really fun to study and explore, but it also makes it really unbelievable. Everything in John is over the top. It's a wedding, though, and everything about weddings is always over the top, right? If you have been to a wedding lately. But it's important to not get lost in John's verbiage and forget that this is a party we've been invited to. Everyone is laughing and dancing, and they're drinking and they're feasting. And somehow, in the midst of all this party, we have conjured up this image of Jesus that he's sort of off sulking in a corner. I mean, isn't that how we always picture him? He's leaning up against a wall and he's watching from a distance. And so when his mom comes and she taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hey, you know, they're all out of booze," he sort of says to her with irritation, "Well, what's that got to do with me?" Which leaves me with the impression of, great, the Lord of the universe is a real party pooper. But what if this isn't really the case? Because what seems to fit much, much better in this story and what we know of God is, what if Jesus isn't annoyed with his mother, but he's teasing her? What if he's had one too many? And he pokes back at her. Oh yeah? Well, what's that got to do with me? Wink, wink. Mothers know their sons very, very well. So I'm certain that Mary doesn't give his sarcasm a second thought. Because she knows he's not interested in the party ending too soon either. She knows his inclination is to laugh and celebrate and to enjoy life to the fullest. So shaking her head in exasperation, she just says to the servants, just do whatever he tells you to do. And she wanders off to dance with Joseph, while Jesus continues to hoop and holler with Peter and James and John and all of his other buds. There is nothing in the text today that doesn't support that alternative reading. Because what resonates for me most powerfully as I envision this story that's laid out before us is there's just this simple feeling of joy. The whole thing is utterly overflowing with joy. It's even ridiculously wasteful if we consider the extravagance, the enormity, and the quality of wine that Jesus produces. I mean, really, that much just isn't needed. But perhaps Jesus' first miraculous sign is meant to show us something about who he is. He is one that enjoys life and appreciates the blessings of the world and fully participates in every human joy. And if Jesus is God, then perhaps we can truly believe that God does delight in us and walks with us, not because it's burdensome for God to do so, but because it's joyful and it's energizing, and because God wants to dance this dance of life with us. Unadulterated joy. A wedding that almost flopped became the best wedding ever. Now, here is the other thing about weddings. There are also always tears. I mean, have you ever been to a wedding where you didn't see some woman rummaging around in her purse for a clean Kleenex? And then, of course, there's always the father of the bride, and he's biting his bottom lip so he doesn't tear up. And there's the couple sitting in the back who no longer hold hands, and a tear sort of slips out of their eyes because something's missing. And at every wedding, there's always a squalling baby, right? There are always tears at weddings. Sometimes they are good tears, and sometimes they aren't. But that truth tells us what true joy is. Now, before I go on, I feel like I should say just this one thing about John and symbolism. Just to make sure that you don't think I'm making up this abundant joy piece. Back then, social customs dictated that if the supply of wine failed at a wedding, social embarrassment wasn't the only thing that the bridegroom would suffer. Without wine, the bridegroom and his family were liable. They were liable for the lack of joy at the wedding. The alcohol served a purpose, as we all know. So hence, if Jesus is the betrothed bridegroom of the world, then he'd better pony up. So back to joy. Not long ago, I heard someone liken joy and happiness as one and the same. They are not. Happiness is something that I can make. Happiness is something external. Happiness is a feeling. And joy is none of those things. Words to explain what joy really is are hard to come by, which I suppose is ultimately why John uses the image of a wedding and wine to try to explain it. True joy isn't dependent upon the presence of laughter, of wine, of smiles, or even good luck. Joy, specifically the joy of the Lord, is much different than that. It's poured into us, and it keeps calling us back to abundant life, even when the well seems dry. Whether Jesus magically filled those jars with wine isn't the point. The point is that only because Jesus was there could true joy drip off their tongues. Now, I probably can't do any better than John in explaining joy in the Word, but I thought I would give it a shot. Joy is this. Here over the rim of the large stone jar. It's filled, but it's not full. Over and over, you have filled it with water and wine, with movies and popcorn, with roller coasters and fancy purses, with glitz and glamour, with security and prestige. Yet no matter how much you put in that jar, it seems empty and hollow. Hold on. Now try this. Put your ear to the rim. And don't look down into the darkness of the jar, because you'll probably interpret that as sadness. But just listen. Can you hear the soft, deep echo calling back to you from within the vessel? Hear it ring back your life to you. The depths murmur, telling you that they are not entirely dry. And then suddenly there's this sweetness on your tongue as a wellspring of tears rises in your heart in response to that murmur. That's joy. Joy is what is in the empty jar that you didn't put there. But Jesus is the one who used that which was empty as a blessing and pours in abundance from that which is filled. And some people call that a miracle. Some people call it a sign, and even some people call it magic. I call it the sweetness of the joy in the Lord.